Okay, good evening, everyone, staff. Thank you all for joining us. Before we begin, I want to share a few notes about kind of our meeting format for this evening. Tonight's meeting for the Planning Commission is being held in person as well as online. Most are commissioners, the planning staff, and members of the public are attending at the Wheat Ridge City Hall today. And we have one commissioner attending via the Zoom platform on the Wheat Ridge City Zoom account. In addition to online via Zoom, we are also broadcasting this meeting on Channel 8 as well as wheatridgespeaks.org. So if you're interested in speaking at tonight's meeting online, please raise your hand on Zoom or on the dial-in telephone call. A Zoom meeting link and a dial-in information can be found on wheatridgespeaks.org. When it comes time for public comment, and there are two opportunities for public comment today, those who wish to comment on the Zoom connection use the raise your hand function, and those of you that are dialing in, you press the *9 to raise your hand, *6 to unmute your phone. So if you plan to speak online tonight, please, in the meantime, keep your background noise to a minimum. If you don't plan to speak, we recommend you just go, you simply view the meeting by watching on Channel 8 or on wheatridgespeaks.org. So we appreciate everyone's participation in the meeting this evening. We hope to create a friendly and respectful atmosphere for public dialogue. And we appreciate your help in this process. So with that, I'd like to now call the meeting of the City of Wheat Ridge Planning Commission meeting to order for July 7th, 2022. We will begin with a roll call of members. Tammy, may I get a roll call of everyone, please?
Yes. So Jerry DiTullio.
Here.
Christine Disney.
Here.
Julianne Stern.
Here.
Melissa Antle.
Present.
Will Kearns.
Here.
Daniel Larson.
Here.
And Janet Leo. Here. And Jonathan Shelkey is absent tonight.
Okay, great, thank you. The next item on our agenda is the Pledge of Allegiance. So please stand and join me in the pledge. I pledge of allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. The next item on our agenda is the approval of the order of tonight's agenda. Is there a motion to approve the order?
Madam Chair, I move that we approve the order of tonight's agenda.
Thank you. Commissioner Disney seconded. Any additions or corrections? All right, let's call for a vote.
Julianne, if you can raise your hand if you want to vote yes for the agenda. All right, so motion passed 7-0.
Great, thank you. The next item on our agenda is the approval of the minutes from our last meeting. Is there a motion to approve the minutes from the meeting on June 2nd, 2022?
So moved.
Second,
Second.
let's vote.
Which one are you pushing, Dan?
I'm pushing the abstain.
Okay, at least I know you're doing that one.
Huh.
Motion passed 5-0 with 2 abstaining.
What's wrong with
Great, thank you. The next item on our agenda is the public forum. We'll now open the general interest public forum segment of our agenda. So this is the time for any person to speak on a subject that is not on tonight's agenda. So if you plan to speak on an item that is on the agenda, please wait until the public hearing to share your comments for that item. As always, all your comments are limited to 3 minutes, and you cannot donate your time to someone else you may be with that wants to speak. If you plan to speak, please give us your name, spell your last name, and share your address. It looks as though we have one person signed up to speak in the general interest forum. Before we start, is there anyone on Zoom, Tammy, that has an interest in speaking? for
No, there
general
is
interest?
nobody.
Okay, great. With that, let's see, Vivian, you have an interest in speaking for the public forum?
Good evening, Vivian Voss, that's V as in Victor OS. Live at 6920 West 47th Place. Thank you very much to talk to you tonight. In front of you, I placed a colorful Wheat Ridge Garden Tour flyer, and that's what I want to talk to you more about tonight. This is a fundraiser for the Wheat Ridge Grange, the one that's over by Stevens Elementary. The Grange supports Stevens Community Garden, the pancake breakfast that will be soon, right before the parade, Saturday, before the Carnation Festival starts. We also support 4-H'ers and Feed the Future. So the last public Wheat Ridge Garden Tour was 2016. We had some issues with hailstorm and everything coming into play, so finally we're back at it. We have 6 unique gardens, and I say they're unique because they're not just flowers, and that's a personal, not just flowers. They have a lot of extra unique sculptures, layouts, hardscapes that any $18 ticket would be worth buying. So your ticket is for the 6 gardens on Saturday, July 23rd, starting at 9 a.m. Your $18 also includes a lunch stop, and there will also be a bike tour of the gardens, which is led by a Wheat Ridge citizen. So I would encourage you to buy your ticket now so we know how much food to get for the lunch stop. I would encourage you to buy your ticket now so that we know how many people will be attending, although you can buy your tickets the day of the tour. And as the brochure speaks about, you can buy tickets at Pietra's Pizzeria on 44th, All Seasons Market on 38th. You can buy at the wheatridgefoundation.org, and you can buy the day of the event. There are volunteers that we are asking for. Those are monitors of each of the gardens so that people know where to go and what not to step on. And those volunteers get a free ticket to the gardens. We appreciate you buying tickets now and passing the flyers to others. And thank you very much for your time. Hope to see you there. Thank you.
Great, thanks, Vivian. Are you guys posting on social media as well? Okay. Great, sounds like a lot of fun. All right, just to double check, Tammy, is there anyone online that has indicated interest in speaking?
Not at this time.
Okay, and we do not have anyone else in the audience, so with that, I'll go ahead and close the public forum. Next item on our agenda is the public hearing. We have one public hearing tonight, case number ZOA-22-04, an ordinance amending Chapter 26 of the Wheat Ridge Code of Laws concerning the implementation of a residential bulk plane development standard. I'd like to, again, welcome any members of the public to our hearing. It's important that this hearing be conducted in a dignified and civil manner. Our goal is, as always, to create a friendly and respectful atmosphere for public dialogue, and we appreciate your help in this process. We start all our public hearings with a presentation from staff, and in some cases, a presentation from the applicant. After the presentations, commissioners will ask questions of staff and the applicant. After that, we'll invite members of the public to raise their hand and comment during the citizens forum. We typically administer an oath for any participant at a public hearing, staff, applicants, and the public. In this hybrid meeting format, we are administering that oath in a slightly different way. If you comment during a public hearing tonight, by choosing to testify, you are agreeing that the testimony you give will be the truth as you know it. So with that, do we have a staff presentation tonight?
Yes, thank you. I'll just present here from the staff table with a couple of comments. Sorry. So for the record, Lauren McLeod, Planning Manager at the City of Wheat Ridge. The residential bulk plane regulations have been a topic of discussion sort of on and off for the last 5 years. But I'm happy to share that we recently discussed the topic again at council and study session in May and did get consensus to expand bulk plane regulations to all detached single unit properties in all R-Series zone districts. And the ordinance before you tonight does just that. It's a longer ordinance than it seems like it needs to be, just to add, 10 words maybe to each zone district, but the way that the code is formatted with those tables, that explains the length. In short, as I think you all know from past discussions, the bulk plane adds a diagonal limit on construction, and it can impact 3 things as a building gets taller. So it could increase the setback, it can increase the step back of upper stories, or it can force a roof to be peaked instead of flat. It can do one of those things or a combination, and we tried to illustrate some of those iterations in that attachment that comes from some of our recent building permits. Currently, as I think you know, bulk plane applies to detached single unit homes in R1C and R3. And that's been the case now for about 5 years, since 2016. That means it applies to about 1/4 of all residentially zoned properties. We, as a staff, have been recommending that we expand bulk plane citywide, and public input over the years has supported that approach as well. In preparation for our study session with council in May, what we did is analyze sort of what would that impact be if we expanded it into other zone districts, and we tried to illustrate that for you in the memo with the table that shows our 8 different zone districts and the 3D graphics that illustrate a prototypical development volume both with and without the bulk plane. And in short, as you saw, the bulk plane would have an effect in all our series zone districts. It's certainly most pronounced in the districts with the 5-foot setback where it already exists in R1C and R3. And it has a diminishing impact as setback increases. But in the end, the purpose of expanding bulk plane is to achieve community goals related to neighborhood compatibility and to address some of the resident concerns that you and council members and staff hear related to privacy and sunlight and massing, particularly related to newer home designs and pop-tops. So we did not receive, as you saw in Wheat Ridge Speaks, any public comment in advance of tonight's hearing, though, again, the sentiment from previous surveys and from Let's Talk would suggest that public is supporting expanding the bulk plane. We did have some public comment in support of bulk plane at the City Council study session. So the ordinance before you would advance to council. That hearing is scheduled for August 8th. And that's really all I had by way of introduction. I'm happy to answer any questions that you have as well.
Madam Chair. Thanks. I think some of you may remember that I brought this up a couple of months ago, asking that the city council would look at bulk plane again. This is a very good tool to avoid some of the conflicts between an established neighborhood and new buildings that are going up. What's interesting, I don't know if you knew this, but we used to have a bulk plane in our code, and after a comprehensive rewrite with Alan White was our planning director, it went away. And I can't remember if council got rid of it or I don't know where it went, but it's glad to see it coming back to all the zone districts, because this will help avoid that conflict where you have a 3-story building going next to a single story in areas similar to like the areas that have been built in districts 1 and 2 and even 3. So I hope that the council passes this as is, and the planning commission does as well. Is there a motion tonight for us to approve it, or?
Yeah, there is a recommended motion to recommend approval to council.
So I couldn't find it.
On page 5 of the staff report, below those yellow.
Oh, there it is.
orangish-
Okay, well, thanks for bringing it forward, and thanks for being proactive as the staff did.
Sure.
With that, Commissioner Larson? Oh, sorry, Commissioner Kearns, did you have a?
Sure. Does this reduce density?
No, so bulk plan doesn't have an impact on the number of units that can be built. It just impacts the design of a structure.
Okay.
Yep.
And then what happens to existing buildings that are not in conformance?
Sure. So the way that the bulk plan was adopted in 2016 is that it would apply to any addition. So if there's an existing home that has a non-conforming setback and they wanted to do an addition either on the ground floor or a pop top, that additional volume would have to comply with the bulk plan. But anything that exists today that isn't in compliance can continue to remain. It's just that you can't make it worse.
Okay.
Yep.
Thank
That's
you.
part of the reason we actually recommended it apply citywide, because, while R1 has a 15-foot setback, there are homes in R1 with setbacks smaller than that. And if they were to do an addition, it'd be appropriate to have the bulk plan apply.
Okay.
Yep.
Thanks.
Commissioner Larson?
Madam Chair, thank you. As it is now, the ordinance applies to R1 and R3. But now we're looking to expand it to all the, I think, 9 residential zone districts, right?
It applies to R1C, which is the smallest lot, single family.
Right.
And yes, it would apply to all 8 R series
8,
districts.
right.
Yep.
First, help me understand, what would a typical house in R2 be?
I'm sorry?
R2, what does that cover? Residential 2?
Residential 2 allows, so the bulk plan would only apply to single unit structures. So
Right.
R2 allows single and duplex, though duplex and multi-family structures all have different setbacks that essentially do the same thing as bulk plan. The setback increases as buildings get taller. So in all 8 of these zone districts, every single unit home would have to comply with the bulk plan, regardless of lot size, lot width, or zoning.
Do you happen to know why R2 was not included in the first go-around?
Yes. So in 2016, it's hard to remember how the landscape was there, but we weren't getting a lot of new residential development at the time. We weren't getting a lot of pop-tops. West Denver was, and at that time, we were starting to see the economics of our market change such that it made financial sense to be scraping and building. And it was predominantly happening on the east side of Wheat Ridge, and the predominant zoning on the east side of Wheat Ridge is R1C and R3. And so I think the perception of the time from council and the community was that it was an East Wheat Ridge problem. So maybe if we do it by zone district, it's an East Wheat Ridge solution. And certainly, as we'll talk about later tonight, the real estate market in our community has changed, and the land use economics have changed to make redevelopment in the entire city make sense. And that's why this would be an appropriate tool based on the development patterns we see in all zone districts.
And then one other thing on the sort of polling and asking people in the community what they think. The original survey back in 2016 indicated that there was a general, a majority of people surveyed supported the idea. And at that point, the I am neutral was 12%, but in the 5 years between that one and the Let's Talk survey, I am neutral increased to 25%, it doubled. So it indicates to me that this is not quite the maybe hot button issue as it was in 2016.
Yeah, I think
Does
you're
that sound
right.
about right?
That's certainly one way to look at it, yes. I think a lot of people maybe don't understand bulk plan, and so I think some people who are neutral may still be the I don't know or I don't understand, but yes, I think that's like a good way to look at it.
So then, the idea here then is to unify the different residential zones, make it apply to the entire city, and as we go forward, all new builds and building additions will be required to comply.
Correct.
Thank you.
Commissioner Disney, any questions or comments?
No questions.
Commissioner Leo? Okay, how does this work for areas where we already have a specific development plan? Do I assume that those development standards for those plans already have a bulk plan regulation?
Most planned developments do not have a bulk plane, though those developments were also negotiated in terms of height and roof design and setback, so there's no surprises because those plans are so specific. Moving forward, when we have a planned residential development, we always encourage folks to start with the baseline of our current zone districts. And now that bulk plane is sort of part of our baseline, I would anticipate that we see more planned developments incorporating the bulk plane.
Yeah, because I mean, I understand this is, bulk plane is really helpful for like infill developments, you know, kind of allows for more compatibility. And when you're kind of planning a whole community, that may not be as much of an issue, but maybe
Right.
just consistency across the city, right?
Yeah, we can't, we won't be applying it retroactively to existing ones, but I think we'll
Right.
see it more commonly with new ones for consistency. Yeah.
Okay. Okay. Yes, Commissioner Kearns.
Okay, so these graphics are really helpful. Are they gonna be included in the code or in the ordinance?
They're not, there are some graphics in the ordinance already, so we already have a bulk plane section because it already exists in R1C. We do handouts pretty frequently, and
Okay.
in the explanatory handouts or like in the permit packet that will go to people, we'll illustrate with examples like that of the drawing that we would need to demonstrate compliance. Yes, yeah,
Great, thank you.
you're welcome.
Madam Chair, Julianne Stern has her hand up.
Great.
Online. Julianne Stern has her hand up.
Okay, Commissioner Stern?
Thank you. I'm curious, in the zones where the bulk plane currently applies, has there been feedback, either positive or negative, from applicants about how it's impacted proposed developments?
It's a good question. The bulk plane actually already exists in most surrounding communities, so a lot of times we get permits that come in from designers who work in Denver and Edgewater, and they've already complied with it, assuming it already existed in Wheat Ridge. So we have not gotten any pushback in the last 5 years.
Great. Any other, Commissioner DeTullio?
Well, you kind of answered it, but I wanted to make sure that the board understood that, the commission understood that we're not reinventing the wheel here. This has been going on in our surrounding communities, and it's solved a lot of conflicts with infill development. So I think it's a good idea that we kind of get on board with the rest of the Front Range and have this. Would you agree that it's in Denver, Lakewood, Arvada already?
Yes, I don't remember exactly the communities, and the variable is sometimes sort of where do you measure it from? We measure
Right.
it at 15 feet and then a 45-degree angle, but yes, it is in more communities than not.
Then, like you said, a lot of developers come into the city thinking we have the bulk plane, and then we don't, and then there's more confusion probably with
Yes.
them and the neighbors.
Yeah, and that's part of why we recommend it apply citywide. It's just easier for messaging. Folks don't usually know which zone district they're in, so it's easier to be everywhere.
Yeah. I'll make the motion whenever you're ready.
Great. If there are no questions or comments, I'll entertain a motion.
Just for the
Thank you,
record,
Madam.
if I may, there's
Oh.
nobody on Zoom to comment, and there was nobody signed up for this public hearing. No, so no public comment.
Okay, with that, sorry to get ahead of ourselves, I will go ahead and close the public forum.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I move to recommend approval of the proposed ordinance amending Chapter 26 of the Wheat Ridge Code of Laws concerning the implementation of a residential bulk plane development standard.
Is there a second? Second. All right, let's vote.
Motion passed 7-0.
Great, thank you, everyone. All right, that concludes our public hearing for tonight. The next item on our agenda is new business, and I do believe we have a presentation as part of new business for the Affordable Housing Strategy and Action Plan.
Yes, thank you. I'll do a quick introduction and then turn it over to these guys. So, very excited to convene to talk about the affordable housing strategy. I've mentioned it a couple times, I think, over the past couple months. I know you all requested to be involved in the process, be educated. The primary reason we're working on this now, I think I've mentioned this maybe, is that there was a state grant. So we benefit from state and local funds that are allowing governments to explore the topic because it's a matter of state and local interest. So we've never had an official policy document or guidance on affordable housing. And those state and local funds have allowed us to hire CZB to help guide us in this endeavor. We needed an expert with more expertise in housing issues. Jeff Hurt, who manages our Let's Talk program, so I think you've met him through that, is managing this project from the city side, and Eric Amy is managing it from the consultant side. We are really lucky to have CZB. It may be a familiar name to you because they helped us through the 2005 neighborhood revitalization strategy and the 2018-19 update. And that longitudinal perspective and familiarity with our community and politics, I think, is proving helpful in this endeavor. So Eric will run through some slides. We included some content for you in the packet. Some of you saw similar content in the public meeting last night, which was well attended. It's okay if there's more questions than answers tonight. We are sort of at the early to middle stage of this process. Yeah, maybe I'll just turn it over to you and you can share how you want this to go.
Thanks, Lauren. Good evening, everyone. Thanks for having us/me here tonight for your interest in the project. I am Eric Amy from CZB, and everything Lauren said in her introduction was true. It's great to be back in Wheat Ridge. We love working in Wheat Ridge, as evidenced by the fact that we keep coming back, and we're so pleased to see the progress that has resulted from the work that we helped with in the past. So we're hoping that whatever this turns out to be will be similarly successful. I think we're going to take this a bit informally, more study session format tonight. That works fine for me if it works for you. So don't feel like you've got to hold your comments or questions to the end. I'm not sure exactly how much time you've budgeted, Lauren. I'll try to get through this with some speed and not linger too long. And if at any time I need to speak up or I'm not, close enough to the mic, please let me know. What I'd like to do tonight through these slides is just do a quick introduction, cover some project basics, go through a few data slides. We just have 6. If you went through the boards or the posters that were in your packet, I believe, and were presented last night at the open house, all this content that you'll see tonight is also there. Just to be a sort of a selection, a sampling, not all of that. That would be a lot to go through. And then, comments and questions and discussion. This is my team. I'm the only one who can be here tonight, but you might, if anybody worked in the NRS or remembers the original NRS, Charles Buki is the founder of our firm and is, working closely on us with this. So is Thomas Eddington, who was here during the NRS process. Karen Pooley is our director of research, and Jeff Yagian is an independent housing consultant. He's a former colleague of mine in the city of Boulder, and he worked in the Division of Housing there for close to 2 decades. So he's got tons of nuts and bolts municipal experience when it comes to housing and affordable housing. We thought that would be really valuable experience on this project. We've worked all over the country, and in the last couple of years, not quite all over the country, but in a lot of different places. And I guess the point of sharing this slide is to let you know that we've seen a lot of different housing markets, not just Wheat Ridges, not just Colorado markets, but a lot of them. And in the last few years, while not all markets are facing the same challenges from an affordability standpoint that the Denver region might be or Wheat Ridge specifically might be, but this is a hot topic on everybody's mind. So it's been a bit wacky what's been going on the last couple of years, to put it lightly, and no one quite knows where it's going to go, but it's something that everyone's trying to figure out. So to some extent, that's also kind of a certain permission slip to say, if you don't have all the answers just yet, that's okay. You haven't done anything wrong because no one else has figured it out either. What we were asked to do in this project under our contract is to analyze the market, assess affordability challenges, so kind of get our arms around what's been going on and who's affected, study tools to produce more affordable housing, and then craft that all into a strategy to put those tools into action. And I think we definitely appreciate Planning Commission's interest in the project overall, and at this stage, and the background you'll get from the kinds of things we'll discuss tonight, it's really, really good. But I think that you'll find it's most likely that the Planning Commission will be most interested in the sort of the next part of this project that comes later in the summer and into the early fall about what are we going to do? What are the tools that we're going to put into place? Because a lot of them will fall into your purview in one way or another. Some detail on our scope items that we've got here. We don't need to belabor this, but I do want to draw your attention to one thing, which is under Task 4, Opportunity Sites Analysis. One of the things that we are asked to do in our contract is to run some different scenarios for Lutheran. So when that redevelopment ultimately happens, what are some possibilities there? What kinds of development could make sense there if it is an important value to include affordable housing? And what are some different approaches that could be taken to provide the community some options? This is our timeline. We are sort of not quite halfway. We have done a lot of preliminary research and data analysis. You'll see a bit of that tonight. And we are working on our tools analysis and our opportunity sites analysis as we speak. And there's the next kind of big milestone for us is a council study session on the 15th of August that's tentatively scheduled, where we'll be talking about a lot of this. We've been to council one time just to kind of kick things off and do introductory type discussion back in May. So this will be our first real kind of bite at the apple in a substantive way, again in August. And then with a delivery of a draft strategy in the August-September timeframe, and then hopefully ultimately after council deliberation and discussion and adoption and a finalization sometime in the fall. Okay, so here's our first of 6 slides. And again, if anybody did go through this last night and says, I heard this already, I do apologize. But I think sharing some of this and getting a chance to ask follow-up questions and get to some more of the detail will be valuable and interesting as well. So the first thing that we're asking here is, what does affordable really mean? And the definition is when, so long as you're not spending 30% of your gross household income on your housing costs, housing is considered affordable. So when you get to 30 and above, it is considered no longer affordable. The industry term for that is cost burdened. And that's a relative measure. So there's not really such a thing as, well, this rent is affordable or this home price is affordable. It varies based on your income. It's a relative measure. Just over a third of all Wheat Ridge households as of 2020 data are facing that cost burden, paying 30% or more of their income towards their housing costs. And that's not equally distributed between renters and owners. Only about a quarter of owners have that challenge, while over half of renters have that challenge. So it is disproportionately concentrated in your renter population. Do a couple slides on home ownership information here in the home ownership market. We thought it was important to include this information, not just because, go back into the last decade, not just because the historical trend is interesting to look at and important, it is, but also because we want people to understand that this run-up in prices didn't just start in 2020. This is not just sort of a COVID and beyond set of circumstances. This chart here, the bottom line is the community's median owner income. So this is not everybody's median household income, it's just your homeowners living in owner-occupied units. And that could be single-unit detached houses and condos and townhouses. Any owned unit is what that covers. You'll see that number jumped up sort of between 2016-ish, 2017-ish, and 2020. It kind of went for a ride. The yellow line is based on the median value of owned units in Wheat Ridge. And what that's showing you is that based on a standard multiplier of 3.5, which is that on an assumption that generally speaking, to be considered affordable, a household can afford to purchase a home that is 3 to 4 times its annual income. So if it were a $100,000 annual income, would be matched to a $350,000 house. That varies depending on a variety of things, tax rates, interest rates, all that. So for this, we just made it clean and we picked 3.5. But the median value changed in Wheat Ridge to such an extent that you could have afforded the median owner-occupied unit in 2015 on about $73,000, I think that number is. And then it jumped to $120,000 by 2020. So it just went straight up like a rocket. And I want to point out, there is a correlation here between prices rising and the median owner income rising. So that number usually doesn't move all that quickly. You know, there are, don't have it off the top, actually I do, go right here. So there are 7,500 owner-occupied units in Wheat Ridge as of 2020. And so if you think about the number of those that turn over in any given year, it's just not that many, right? So in order for the median owner income to move to such an extent, when you don't have that many properties turning over all the time, what that tells us is that your new homeowners in Wheat Ridge have significantly higher incomes than your previous owners. And that just makes logical sense. If you think about what properties are selling for these days, you'd have to have higher incomes, right? So that's part of that story.
Eric, can I jump in here real quick?
Sure.
This data all applies to first-time home buyers, correct?
No, it does not. It includes first-time home buyers, but it's not only first-time home buyers.
If you've been living in a house for 10 years and you built up some equity, when you sell the house, that equity comes with you. Is that not included in the figures?
No, this doesn't reflect. This is only about values and incomes.
But if you've got 10 years of equity in a house and you use that to buy your new house, your mortgage is going to be less, at a smaller percentage of your,
Theoretically, that's true, yes.
okay. Okay, thank you.
So are you getting back to the multiplier question? That
It was kind of leading in that direction.
Yes, yes. So some people will, when you buy your first home, you're not bringing a lot of equity. You're kind of just praying you can scrape together that down payment. And if you have lived in a home for a while and it's an appreciating market, it's very different. Yes, so that's among those things that kind of vary. That's included in there as well. It doesn't necessarily change the general statement of sort of 3 to 4 times. But I appreciate the question because it's relevant. So this is some data on sale prices, for Wheat Ridge and for some of your neighbors. Just kind of confirming this overall story that, yep, prices are on the move. I want to go back and say here that these are not sale prices in this previous chart. This is values, based on values that are self-reported. So there's always a bit of, is this really right? Do people know what their properties are really worth? It's still a valuable measure, but you want to check it against other things. So it's important when we go over to actual sales data, which this is on this slide that you're seeing here. This is actual sales data for 5 years, 2017 to 2021. And these are single unit detached houses only. So when we wanted to do this comparison, we just wanted to do apples to apples. So we pulled out condos and townhouses and just did detached houses to detached houses. And what you see is this pattern is the same everywhere. Golden's a bit of an outlier. It's a bit more expensive, but essentially, Wheat Ridge, Arvada, and Lakewood look very similar. So this is the case all around. The value of all this, to some extent, there's some interesting things in here, like you'll say, I didn't know that. Thanks for sharing that information. And some of this will be kind of obvious. Like this slide, you'll say, so you're telling me it got more expensive to buy a house. Well, I already knew that. Some of this is just validating what you think you already know. There's value in that too. Any questions before I keep plowing through? Okay. Please do interrupt me if you want to. If we zoom in just on the owner-occupied sales, again, this is real sales data for only Wheat Ridge in this chart. We zoom in, and then we also add townhouses and condos. It kind of gives us a sense of three things actually. Number one, what's the percentage? How many condos and townhouses and detached houses do we have moving in the market over this time period? Are we 50% house place and a 50% condo place or something else? Well, this kind of gives us a sense of, at least right now, the volume of properties of different types that have been moving, what those breakdowns are, and also what their median prices are. So we can see, for instance, that a single unit detached house, as we just saw here, the 2021 median is almost $600,000, $580,000. And relatively speaking, townhouses and condos are more of a bargain. That was more true in the past when it comes to townhouses than it is today. Condos are still a relative deal. They can be afforded on a lower income than you would need to buy a house. When you see that spike in the townhouse median, by the way, that's really just reflecting new product that comes on the market. So as new product comes on, because anything that's new is expensive, period, the end. And as more and more townhouses come online and they sell for pretty high prices, it pulls that median up. And I think Lauren can confirm, but I believe the number of townhouse units that have come online in the past few years is fairly substantial, especially in relation to how many there already were. But the point remains, it takes a lot more income to buy now a detached house or even a townhouse than most folks really have. An interesting thing about Wheat Ridge is actually its rental market. So certainly, we know that Wheat Ridge has traditionally really valued its sense of identity as a single family or single unit detached house place, and it does have many great single unit detached neighborhoods, but it also has a lot of rental units, and the city is trending toward almost being 50-50 on rental and ownership. And what's interesting in the data here is the extent to which Wheat Ridge rental units have been less expensive overall than the Denver region. So if you were a renter, you'd be able to find, going back many years, a better deal in Wheat Ridge than you could find elsewhere. There's a reason for that. It's not just necessarily because Wheat Ridge is perhaps a less desirable location. What we really think it is because the units are older. You have a lot of, 40, 50, 60-year-old rental units, and as they age and as other things come online in other communities nearby, they sort of filter down. And so they've been more affordable up till now. It's still the case, but that's an important story. As new things come online, then the rental stocks overall will look less affordable. As new projects like the project on 38th near Wadsworth, or the Edison project on Wadsworth, just south of 38th in that area. They're new, they're expensive, the rents will be high. Clear Creek Crossing is another example. That will sort of start to skew these numbers a little bit. But much of this data predates those. It's also interesting to note that, again, the correlation that because rental units have been cheaper here historically, it's also been a place where renters with lower incomes could live, and that's reflected in the data as well. Both lower rents and lower incomes for renters. Yes, ma'am.
When you were analyzing the rents, I know that because we have so many older, like this town is full of them, are they proportionally also getting to where they're not affordable, or are they still considered the older rent? Like, are the older units charging a lot lower rent, or are they trying to keep up with the market rate? That's my question.
It's a little bit of both. Generally speaking, there will sort of be a cap on how fast the rents can rise on units that are older, that are smaller, that are lesser quality, however defined. It's all based on kind of what's on offer in the market and how much the demand is. And so any landlord will try to maximize, of course, the amount of rent that they can charge. Sometimes it's moderated a little bit by other considerations, such as if maybe I can raise my rents a little higher, but will I increase my vacancy if I do that? It'll take me a little bit longer to fill that unit. Maybe it's better off for me to keep my rent a little lower than I'd like it and keep full occupancy, right? And these are sort of individualized decisions that different rental property owners and managers make. But generally speaking, yes, they would like to, raise the rent. So if they had the ability, they thought that they could lease. So take an older unit that's like $950 a month. If the owner of that thought in the current marketplace that he or she could get $1,250 instead, I think it would be economically irrational to not do that. Right? So there's always seeking to maximize rents. And it's not out of the goodness of the hearts of most rental property owners that rents are inexpensive, relatively speaking. It's because that's what the market dictates. Did that answer your question? Okay.
I had one quick question.
Yes, sir.
So as you're doing this study on these rental units, the older rental units, were you aware of what the Wheat Ridge Housing Authority had done in the early 2000s about buying multifamily units, rehabbing them, and then selling them? And they were rental units. They usually had an absentee landlord. So the property was dilapidated. The Housing Authority went in with state money and city money and grants, rehab those properties so they were pretty nice. And then they were turning around and selling them to first-time home buyers. Have you seen any of that data?
Not that specifically, no, but the concept that you're describing is a familiar one.
But this isn't being addressed with this. I mean,
Well-
as we move forward, has that plan been abandoned completely, that we're just going to look at funding more rentals and more density and higher rents? Is that what's the ultimate goal of the city? What are we going to be when we grow up? More rentals, more density, or are we going to look for home ownership? Whether it's single family or multifamily?
Well, now you're getting a little bit ahead of us to, the questions of solutions and what tools we're going to have and what we're going to do about it. And
I
we're
mean,
not quite-
but there's got to be a goal here. What's the goal? Is it home ownership or more rental, lower rental costs? When you got the contract and when you talk to staff and council, what's their goal? To people buy houses and they're subsidized so they can get the equity later? Or is the goal to have more density and more rental properties?
I don't think that is clear at this moment. No one's given us direction on that, but it's one of those are the types of questions when we have that study session on the 15th of August that we'll be exploring and looking at, is there a preference for, and those are two perhaps distinct and mutually exclusive directions, or maybe there's some answers to be found on this one and some answers to be found on this one, and maybe some answers to be found in another direction. But those are all valid questions that you're asking because they all inform how we move forward. So what direction the city would like to move on those questions then influences what tools and initiatives and programs do you lay out and pursue.
Well, I would
That-
appreciate, go ahead.
Just to add on that, so that question was specifically asked at the open house last night and is being specifically asked right now on the survey that's live. Like, what population of people are you most concerned about? Owners, renters, seniors? So obviously trying to figure out the what we have to do before we can figure out the how. And certainly the Housing Authority's specific purpose at that time was to create affordable first-time home buyer opportunities. I don't think we'll be that narrow in what we outline in the action plan as possible options. And some of these conversations may bleed out of the scope of this project into a comprehensive plan update when we ask ourselves as a larger community, who do we want to be and who do we want to plan for in the next 20 years or so? So that's one of the questions that's unanswered yet.
All right.
Thanks for the question.
This is Commissioner Stern. May I jump in on that point?
Yeah, go ahead, we can hear you.
Okay, great. I would suggest that we don't look at homeownership or rentals as an either or. In the affordable housing world, we often talk of the housing spectrum or continuum, and it recognizes that the entire housing market is interrelated. So if first-time homebuyers are having a hard time finding affordable homes to buy, then they continue to rent, and that puts more pressure on the rental market. And they're renting units that maybe could be affordable to somebody else and pushing up the rental prices. So I'm hopeful that the plan and the strategy really takes a more comprehensive look and is based in really where the need is and which members of our community are experiencing the greatest challenges maintaining their housing.
Thanks. I think Lauren cited earlier a stat that was Wheat Ridge had no market rate rental units built between 80 and 2020. Was that?
Yeah, 1980s and 2019.
2019.
So basically 40 years. Yeah.
Right. So if you've got the open house posters in your packets, you have this little factoid. We don't have it on the slides tonight, but the relative to the Denver region, because of what Lauren just told us, the percentage of rental units that were built pre-1980 is much larger as a percentage than what's going on in the region, because the region was building more rental units when Wheat Ridge was not. And so that just sort of hammers home the point about how old Wheat Ridge's rental units are. Because that's all true, and because the rents are lower, it also means that, this is just sort of another way to talk about what we just looked at, means that Wheat Ridge has done a better job providing housing that's affordable to lower income renters. So here we've got a percentage of all rental units in the city that are affordable to renter households that make less than $50,000. And then below that to households that make below 20,000, earn between 20,000, or sorry, lower than $20,000. The top is inclusive of the bottom there. But you see that over half of Wheat Ridge rental units are affordable to households under $50,000, and that's only about a third metro-wide. And then below that, for the very lowest income renters, it's 10% versus not even 5%. So that is sort of, that's the story. It was an interesting story that we found. But all that being said, it doesn't mean that lower income renters have it easy in Wheat Ridge, because no matter what these rents actually turn out to be, and to some extent this is a little bit misleading because the way that the number of units that rent at a certain price are distributed here throws this off a little bit. But for instance, there's just, once you have an income of $20,000, you can really afford only $500 a month. And when that's true, I mean, there just isn't a lot for you. And it kind of remains true, but gets a little better, a little better, a little better, but it's still not great, all the way up to, you know, about 35,000 or so. And I think actually in the Wheat Ridge market now, it's more like 45,000 or so. But that's a bit of a long explanation to make the point that Wheat Ridge's lower income renters are struggling. What you're seeing here in this chart is the gray bars are, the gray columns are the numbers of renters we have in each one of these categories by income, and the yellow hatched line is the percentage that is paying at least 30% of its its income and housing costs. So what you see is, for all intents and purposes, anybody who's under $35,000 a year in income is paying more than 30%. Not quite everybody, but almost everybody. And then that next category up, 35 to 50, it's about half, just over half. So this is a challenge. Wheat Ridge is about a $25 an hour, if you think about it in wages, $25 an hour minimum housing market right now. And there are many people who don't make $25 an hour at their job. So this is an issue. Again, it's not just Wheat Ridge, it is region-wide. It is outside this region, across many parts of the country, even parts of the country today that a few years ago would have been considered, you know, much softer real estate markets, much more affordable. They're seeing their own struggles. So this is a real challenge. So that's all I have for you on data. I won't bore you with any more charts. Additional analysis on types of sites and tools is what we're going to do next. You know, as I said before, we're kind of into that right now, looking at different kinds of properties, whether they are redevelopment sites in corridors or the Lutheran opportunity or other things. And we're getting into that now. There's the study session on the 15th, which I talked about, and the draft strategy and action plan by September. So that's really all I've got sort of going from me to you. At this point, if you've got questions or other insights you want to share or things that you want us to be thinking about, we'd be happy to hear about that.
Madam Chair.
We can go over tools, but we're not proposing anything yet. Are you referring to what's in the handout? Mm-hmm. Sure.
So tell me about direct participation in the real estate market. Direct participation by the city, correct?
Yes, it could be the city or, you know, an agency of the city or a partner organization that's set up to do that. So something else everyone should understand probably intuitively, but, you know, land here is very expensive now.
Yeah.
It's not been cheap, but I mean, it's by any objective measure, it's pretty expensive now in Wheat Ridge. And the cost of land is a major component in the cost to build housing and affordable housing. And so sometimes public sector organizations will make a decision that the acquisition and control and disposition of land is something that they can do to participate in one real estate deal or a variety of real estate deals that might have affordability attached to it. It happens in different ways in different places. One example that I can cite, if anyone knows, I just know it's off the top of my head, I worked on it a little bit in Boulder. There was a site in the middle of Boulder, was a variety of things, including a car dealership, and the city and RTD got together to buy this important chunk of land like about 20 years ago or so, and with a plan, a long-term plan to redevelop that. And so if you can imagine what the value of the land did between whenever that was, I'll just call it 2000 and 2020, it was a pretty good investment. And so when they wanted to see that redeveloped, they wanted a large component of affordable housing included, and they said, we will go to RFP and we will not sell this land, we will give this land to the project. And when they do that, then it drops the cost of development significantly. So they can remove that land basis from that deal. So
Because
that's
they
just,
don't make a profit, they basically sell the land at the year 2000 price.
or just give it away. And so whatever they spent, you know, a relative, it's not like it was no money, but, you know, compared to the land costs of 2020 or 2022, not very much at all. And they say that is whatever we spent back then, that is our give to this project now. So that kind of thing is what that refers to.
Does Wheat Ridge own any parcels? Or what does the landscape look like here? Does the city own any, is the city in any situations like that?
We don't have anything land banked, no, but we also haven't gotten to the point of exploring sort of what could we do?
Yeah.
And I should point out that that list, for instance, is like representative examples. So these are tools that exist to do the things that we'll be talking about. Some of them may be fits, some of them may not be fits. That one in particular, one reason is if you don't own any land, then it may not be the time to now start buying it at current prices, for instance, right? So we'll be looking at those various things and others and saying, based on what we know about the Wheat Ridge market, based on what we know about the constraints, a variety of constraints, physical, legal, et cetera, and understanding, taking into account the feedback we get from council, then we say, all right, now we know which of these maybe stay on the table, which come off the table, and those are also kind of broad categories, so there's a lot of detail inside any one of those that we're just not there yet, and we'll have to unpack and then think about if something seems intriguing, how would it apply, how would it work, so on and so forth.
Madam Chair?
Chair, Commissioner Stern also has her hand raised.
Well, good
just
to
so
have
you know.
Denise or Christine first.
Sorry, I was, sorry, who was it? Commissioner Disney? Okay.
And then,
This is anecdotal, but maybe you can follow up on this observation. One thing that I've noticed in my neighborhood, 5 houses in my neighborhood in the last 10 years that were owner occupied have now become rental properties. And the rents on these single-family homes are so high that there's multiple people living. And so that inadvertently, I guess, increases density. So I know that a lot of houses are being, like a house 2 doors down from me would have been a perfect starter home, but it was bought by an investor who turned it into a rental property. Now, it's occupied by a couple, but that's been happening a lot. And it's dismaying for people who own their homes because these rental properties aren't maintained. The yards don't look nice anymore. They have weeds. We had people parking on the lawn. There was businesses being run out of these houses. And I think this is like a relatively, maybe in the last 2 years have you seen that happening? Is that going to slow down now that interest rates are going up? Is this part of the problem or solution?
Well, how many people can you fit in a house for how much rent? Then you'll know if it's an affordability solution, despite whatever challenges that might come with it. But it's been a nationally documented issue about the amount of investment dollars that have flowed into the real estate market. Sometimes individuals, sometimes small pools of investors, sometimes big institutional investors that are purchasing what otherwise would be owner-occupied single-unit houses and using them as rentals because the cash flow is great. And we haven't studied and don't have empirical basis to say, well, prices would be this much lower if that weren't allowed. I can't say that for sure, but certainly that is a contributing factor in this kind of weird housing situation that we're facing now, for sure. And I would also say, though, that it works differently in different kinds of markets. So, in Cleveland, where you can go, or Detroit, or Buffalo, or places like that, it was easier to scoop up a large volume of properties. On a per unit basis, they were fairly inexpensive, and that has a certain effect, which is a bit of a different animal from, I think, what you're describing here in Wheat Ridge, where if you were to come in and purchase a house to use as a rental now, you're looking at a pretty hefty investment. So, how many people are doing that when they had the property previously, and how many have purchased it in the last 2 years for that purpose? In some other world with more time, I'd be really curious to look into that. But I think it's probably in terms of what's happening for the affordability situation in Wheat Ridge, that's probably on the margins a little bit. What's basically facing Wheat Ridge is what's facing all of the Denver region. It's sort of the same package of things. It's just that you guys are not isolated, right?
Yeah.
Yes, sir.
Commissioner Tutuola.
So based on what Commissioner Disney mentioned, what we're seeing at the county is investors buying up single-family properties or multifamily, and they're bidding over the asking price, which is raising the property tax on the assessments. So your property taxes will go up that following year. And it's artificially raising these prices and artificially raising the property taxes. So in your neighborhood, if they bid $100,000 or $50,000 over the asking price, that's going to raise your property taxes on the next assessment. And so to address what Commissioner Kearns had mentioned is we don't have land to give away to lower the price, but the only way that this would work in Wheat Ridge is that there's a subsidy for a first-time home buyer to buy a property, and that lowers their purchase price, and they're going to get the equity, not the government or anybody else. So say there's a property that's bought by the city of Wheat Ridge, I'm just going to say that, or Wheat Ridge Housing Authority for $500,000, they have to actually sell it less to actually get it affordable for somebody, for a first-time home buyer, because like Dan mentioned, there's equity in people that have already purchased, but then they get the equity, and that's what we were doing with the housing authority. We would sell properties at $120,000 each for a condo on 38th and Quail, but they were actually worth $125,000 or $130,000. We had invested that money in it, so that property owner got the benefit of that equity, but they had to be there for maybe 2 to 5 years. It was a deed restriction that they couldn't sell it, and then the housing authority had first right of refusal back if they wanted to sell it, so we could actually buy it at a higher price. But to say we're going to subsidize, what we have to do is be able to subsidize the purchase of a first-time home buyer so they get the equity and have that American dream. They're not going to get it with these investors and people raising their rents the way they are. And I got an employee at the county that was approved for $500,000, and every time they go out to bid, they're outbid by $50,000 or $100,000 in Golden area for a single-family home. Mm-hmm. So that's why when I brought up there earlier, what are we going to be? It's going to be, and I agree with Commissioner Stern, it's going to have to be a combination of rental that's affordable, that's probably subsidized, and also so they can live there, but also we got to look at the landlords, make sure they're not absentee landlords, but also a way to get some first-time home buyers actually into the city, and maybe they're subsidized a little bit. I don't know how that's going to work with grants or HUD money or ARPA money that's coming in or whatever, but that's why I say we got to kind of plan ahead, because the investors are gobbling the stuff up and raising the cost of everything across Jefferson County.
And that model you just talked about is what's funny is a lot of the best affordable housing solutions are not new. So everybody wants everything innovative and fresh, and sometimes it's like this thing that someone invented in 1988, that's still good if you just have the money to do it, and that is an excellent approach. And I know Boulder does it. I'm not sure how many other places do it. I know Park City does it. I think it's not uncommon amongst the more sophisticated local governments, and who knows, could turn out to be a fit here too.
Commissioner Kearns?
So Commissioner DiTullio mentioned that the overbidding raises the property values, it raises the taxes on everybody. But also what I've noticed, and especially in my neighborhood, is that the former long-term rental units are now short-term rentals. And this is 4 units just on my block that have turned over from long-term rentals to short-term. These short-term rentals are essentially vacant, maybe 60 to 80% of the time. They're kind of only used on weekends. And I get it. I mean, as a landlord, it's sort of less wear and tear on the house in theory by using it as a short-term rental than as a long-term rental with people living in there all the time. But I see that, the short-term rentals, as completely degrading the inventory of available rental units because so many of them are being used for kind of weekend Airbnbs or short-term rentals. So, and, you know, on my block, 4 of them, and that's just by my house. So seeing that, I'm kind of understanding all of these factors are playing in to form a perfect storm of housing unaffordability and housing unavailability. So I'm really interested in some tools and, you know, what we can do to make Wheat Ridge more affordable. So thank you, and I'm looking forward to it.
Didn't the city pass an ordinance capping how many short-term rentals we can have?
We did, yeah, so that's part of, for that reason precisely. So it's limited to 2% for whole home short-term rentals in each district, and we've hit that cap in District 1. So there are 49 in District 1, and there cannot be any more unless and until any of those discontinue. So those got scooped up, especially on the east side, pretty quickly, but there's a hard limit on that, yeah.
And how is the city managing that, making sure that no more than 49 exist?
We work with a third-party licensing vendor who has the computer code AI to routinely scan all rental platforms to identify if there are addresses that are renting units that are not licensed in our database. So we do that on a pretty routine basis.
Commissioner Stern, you have your hand raised. Did you have a comment?
Yeah, thank you. I have a couple questions. One is actually just, you know, I'll jump off of Commissioner Kearns' comment, and I think Commissioner Kearns conveyed a strong sense of urgency just now. I'm curious if that is kind of echoed in what you've been hearing in the community feedback. I'm looking at the last page in the printed materials we have, and it's an interesting feedback sheet. When you've been out in the community, are you hearing that our neighbors believe there is a housing affordability problem in Wheat Ridge?
Yeah, well, I'll take it very briefly, and then Jeff has been out in the community more through Let's Talk. I would say yes. I mean, it's hard to capture feedback from the people who look to move to Wheat Ridge and can't afford it and go away, right? So we have to put on a little bit of a lens knowing that that's happening anecdotally. And, you know, last night we asked the questions that were the last page of the board in your packet, and resoundingly, while most attendees said that they didn't sort of feel a concern about their own affordability, almost every single dot was put into the somewhat concerned or extremely concerned when we said, when it comes to other people you know or the community at large, how concerned are you about affordability? So there's yes, the answer is yes. That survey question is on our website now, and I think it will sort of underscore that a lot of people who have lived in Wheat Ridge for 20 plus years are fine, but they recognize that it's not just about them. In Let's Talk, I think it's been coming up. Do you have any?
Yeah, it's definitely come up. We've asked the question in multiple neighborhoods. It's been a top tier issue in all the surveys. We also do the citywide resident survey every couple of years. That's statistically valid. It has come up as a top tier issue in that as well. So it's definitely being quantified in addition to the kind of anecdotal stuff we hear.
Madam Chair.
Yes, Commissioner Larson.
I'm sorry.
Oh.
If it's okay, I have a couple more questions.
Sorry.
Okay, go ahead, Commissioner Stern.
Thank you. Sorry for the awkwardness of being on Zoom. I'm curious as a follow-up to that, and this may be kind of something that's not visible or just harder to assess, but do you feel like you've been able to reach renter households, and particularly that really high proportion of renter households that are living in unaffordable housing?
So we are doing some public outreach as a part of this process, but the majority of this exercise is meant to be more technical. So I firmly believe that when we update our comprehensive plan and when we do Let's Talk, we are definitely striving to reach a more representative group of people. This particular effort is going to be driven, I think, significantly more by council policy direction than by sort of far-reaching public input. So the answer is yes. When public comment informing public policy is our overarching goal, as it is more often in Let's Talk and with the comp plan, that will be the primary focus to make sure we're catching some of those harder to reach populations. But for this, I think it's a data point, but it's not the focus of this particular effort.
Thank you. I think just one more quick one. This is all, these boards have such great numbers and data, and I'm a total data nerd, so I really love this and found it engaging. One thing that I didn't see here is that I feel like would really help put this in context is there's a lot about what housing costs are like for households at different income levels. It made me so curious what income levels we do have in Wheat Ridge. So like when we're talking about a household making $50,000, like how much of Wheat Ridge is that, for example? So just a thought about, I don't know, how to understand this data. And then I really liked hearing from the other commissioners about some of the housing challenges they've seen in their own neighborhoods. I like Commissioner Kearns. I'm also seeing houses turn over to short-term rentals in my neighborhood, and it's just a bummer to not have neighbors in houses neighboring yours. And really related to that, I'm also seeing that our housing stock, at least in my neighborhood, it's just really tough for young families. I have had multiple neighbors have young kids, been really excited to have friends for my young kids, and then their housing is just not adequate, or they feel like there are barriers to investing where they are, and they leave for another community. And it really makes me worried about the future of our neighborhood and the ability of our housing stock to accommodate the next generation of Wheat Ridge families. Thank you.
Thank you, Commissioner Stern. Commissioner Leo, you had a comment or a question?
Yeah, so I was just thinking of a few years ago when they were building those homes on 38th, down a little thick from King Soopers and down from Sheridan. They said that they were building those because a lot of the regentrified area in Denver on the east side of Sheridan was so extremely expensive that people couldn't afford that, so they were jumping across Sheridan to live in Wheat Ridge, which was more affordable. Has any of that come into play in this and in the surrounding areas that are being regentrified and are extremely expensive, much more than Wheat Ridge? And what's the impact of that on Wheat Ridge? I mean, I'm just remembering that whole discussion about that.
If I'm following your question correctly, I think what you're getting at is, are you asking about as the sort of demand from other places spilled over into Wheat Ridge, and then what effect did that have?
The adjacent area, east of Sheridan, east of 38th and Sheridan, that whole area has been regentrified, and young couples, young families could not afford that, but they could afford to come on the west side of Sheridan into Wheat Ridge. And have you seen any of that in the last few years? Because this is back, I don't know, 4 or 5 years ago.
Well, it's a sort of tale as old as time. My colleague Charles says that he has a saying that everybody gets their house of second choice. So people look at where they want to be, where they really, really want to be, and they realize they can't do it. It's not affordable. So then they go to the next place that they can. And so what we have seen, and what's sort of interesting about Wheat Ridge, and it has benefits and it has serious costs, as we've talked about here tonight, is that there was a time when Wheat Ridge was not a place of first choice, maybe not even second choice. And my firm was hired in 2004, 2005 to work on revitalization, right? So it was, how do we become economically stronger? How do we become more expensive? How do we get a stronger tax base? And so over time, what has happened is that the region has become so strong, and certain places were stronger first, and then got so strong and so expensive that people couldn't be there, and so it spilled over to the next place, spilled over to the next place, spilled over to the next place. Why do people who work in Manhattan live in New Jersey or Long Island or Westchester County, right? Well, for a lot of reasons, but one reason is it's so expensive to live in Manhattan. And so it's the same phenomenon has happened here. And it's just now become the case that there's been so much spillover and there's so much demand that's now finding its way to Wheat Ridge that the question really kind of to ask about potential households is, okay, where do you go now? So if you can't afford Denver or Wheat Ridge, Arvada, Lakewood, certainly not Golden, where's the place you're going to go next? I don't know the answer to that question. Firestone. Texas,
Yeah.
Who knows?
Mm-hmm.
The other thing about that project in particular, so that project was completed in 2015, and so it just predates that inflection point where values outpaced incomes and when land values were different. So from the start of that project to the end, I think it's 26 townhomes, the sale price of the final unit was about $150,000 more than the first unit they sold, just in the duration of the construction of that project in 18 months. So it was our first townhome project, but it was at a time when values are $200,000 less for townhomes and detached than they are today. So it was hard to predict what would happen after that occurred. And it's not because of Parents Row, and it's not because of West Denver, it's because of sort of these macro forces that were happening to our market and building costs and land values.
So when say you become a first choice and you're not a second choice anymore, isn't that when affordability goes, less affordability? I mean, your pricing goes up because you're first choice, rather than being second choice. I mean, it seems like it goes hand in hand. When you become first choice, values go up, prices go up.
Yes. It's sort of like the price of success in a certain way, right?
Right.
When you become desirable, when you become expensive, then the downside of that is not everyone can have it. Not everyone can afford it. And that is the problem that's faced here. Yes.
So I just wanted to, I don't know, maybe pontificate on a lot of what you've presented, because you've worked in a lot of communities. I've lived in communities that have had a lot of regulatory support to try and maintain affordability. But I mean, this is kind of one of those wicked problems where, like you said, it's just the nature of, housing follows the market. And so doesn't this come down to, maybe as Commissioner DiTullio was indicating earlier, it's kind of like, well, what's our philosophy as a community, and what are we willing to regulate and impose on developers itself? Because the market's going to do what it's going to do. It's just how proactive as a community, and are we willing to either make those investments or tax the people that need to be, tax new developments, make them pay. Because I believe, looking at this fact sheet, kind of who's our priority? Well, all our population types should be our priority, you know, and it is a spectrum. It's when I'm buying my first house, or I don't make enough money and I need to rent, or I want to age in place and I want to be able to afford the taxes in my community, you know, all these, you know, I mean, I think everyone goes through all these phases at different points in their life. So to me, it seems like whatever strategy we come up with needs to have, if we really believe these things are important, we need to make a commitment to, as a community, that we will enforce that through like regulations, not just, hey, here's a policy recommendations, or here's an incentive for developers. You know, and I'm kind of curious from, so done with pontificating a little, but I'm kind of curious from a lot of the communities you've worked with, which ones have you found that communities have actually been able to adopt and have seen some success? I understand across the country, we will never catch up with the shortage of housing, right? You know, there's the shortage of housing, and then there's the affordability of the housing. But which ones start to make a dent at, you know, kind of a local level?
Well,
I know that's a big question. I'm just curious to pick your brain while we have you here.
sure. The regulatory approach is an approach, and it doesn't mean if you take a regulatory approach that you can't also take other approaches. But for example, if you want to do that, so let's just cite, for instance, like an inclusionary zoning, or sometimes just called inclusionary housing policy, that requires, if you're going to build something new and it's of a certain, meets a certain threshold, that the developer is required to either give some of those units as affordable, however that's going to be defined, and if they either cannot or don't want to, that there's an option to pay a fee in lieu of that. You know, I think Denver has that, Boulder has that, Park City has that, a lot of some expensive markets have that. The reason why is because it's a value extraction mechanism, and it works when you have a lot of value. So there are many markets in America where you can't effectively have an inclusionary housing policy and have the developer make that work. You can say, in those cases, the developer will say rightly, you're trying to extract value from my project and I don't have it in the project because this whole market's not valuable enough, the land basis isn't valuable enough, and so you've got to make sure that whatever your regulatory approach is, that it's properly matched to what
Sure.
the values are. But yeah, in doing that, in the markets where that is possible, does take community consensus and political will to do that, because it's not like a small thing to put on the development community. And generally, if they had their way, they probably would prefer not to do that. But it has been done. It's tried and true. Just like I said to Commissioner DiTullio a little while ago about the deed-restricted affordable homeownership opportunities, most of this stuff's not new. It's just which do you want and which costs are you willing to pay. And I think that's the main message is whatever, and again, I don't want to jump, we're not proposing anything, we're not there yet, but something important for everyone to understand when we get to that conversation is there is no easy, free way to get affordable housing. So either you're extracting it and someone's got to make it happen and it's difficult and expensive, or you've got to find subsidies somewhere, whether that's from someone else's pocketbook outside Wheat Ridge or it's Wheat Ridge's own pocketbook, that's got to be found. And affordable housing is very expensive to produce and maintain over time. So that's the main message. I would say that it's also a possibility, again, it's not a non-regulatory approach depending on how it's done, but I mean, there are other opportunities such as preserving existing, buying and preserving existing affordability. So we talked a few minutes ago about all those rental units in Wheat Ridge that are aging and they are relatively affordable. There's a universe in which you could have a program where you would go to that landlord and say, your units are here, they are affordable, they are not exactly in the condition that we would like. We'd like the building to look better, the site to look better, and we'd like the people who live here to live in better conditions, right? Because right now they're trading affordability for quality, and we'd like to not have that be the case. And so you could say, we will essentially buy upgrades for your property and you will trade us affordability. You will not raise the rents, or you will raise them on a certain graduated scale over time. And that doesn't require any new construction, any new units, any new buildings. It doesn't require a regulatory regime, on the development community. It's an agreement between, let's say in this case, the city of Wheat Ridge and a rental property owner that that property will be improved and affordability will be preserved, and that will be paid for by some funding that we're going to find somewhere.
Well, and I will be done in a second, but you just hit on something I was actually trying to talk to someone about last night at the open house, and this is maybe both for you and Lauren. Isn't it, we have a state law here that municipalities cannot impose rent control? So it's something that's regulated by the state. Each municipality can't define that, correct?
So the net effect of that downstream is the way, if you're going to have an inclusionary housing regulatory system, it's got to make sure it does not run afoul of that law, yes. But it doesn't mean it can't be done. It just means that very specifically have to make sure that that mechanism doesn't get sideways with the state law on that issue.
I'm not sure I understood
Sorry,
your
are you
response.
asking, can we change the state law to have rent control?
Well, I mean, maybe it's just maybe my confirming the state law is we couldn't just impose rent control. I'm not saying or advocating either way, I'm just trying to understand.
There is a state law that limits our ability to control rent, but at the same time, we can have income qualified deed restricted units.
Okay, thank you. Commissioner Larson, did you?
Would you explain how a income-controlled deed restriction will work?
I'll take a first crack at it, you probably know more. So we have some of those. So most everything that the Foothills Regional Housing Authority owns, manages, and builds is a income qualified deed restricted. So we also have the town center apartments. Those are age restricted, income restricted, and typically those are subsidized by federal funds, either through HUD or CDBG funds or through use of the low income housing tax credit. And it means that every occupant that comes has to do paperwork similar to getting mortgaged, demonstrate that they are within or below a certain income bracket. And those units can only be rented to people within or below certain income brackets. And typically the deed restriction, meaning the duration of time that you have to rent that unit to an income qualified person is 15 years, is the normal term. So the more you can potentially preserve the naturally occurring affordable housing by putting a deed restriction in place ensures that you have that 5, 10, or 15-year horizon to be offering housing to folks within a certain income bracket. So Fruitdale School has 5 of their 12-ish units are income restricted. And it's a great mechanism. When we talk about this preserving naturally occurring affordable housing, NOAA, that is a mechanism that Dr. Cog has been studying and other communities have been studying because, like one of you asked earlier, won't those rents go up if the market will absorb that? And the answer is yes.
At what point does the deed restriction come in, when the property changes hands, or does the city initiate this with the building?
The city doesn't manage any deed restricted properties. All the ones that we have in Wheat Ridge are based on federal funds or LIHTC and are owned. The Housing Authority has a minority interest in 3 properties, and then the Foothills Regional Housing has the balance of them. But it runs with the land based on the financing that was used at the outset of the project.
Oh, I see. Thank you. The other question, though, has more to do with the market, and we've talked about demand and the fact that Wheat Ridge is not an island. We are part of the very large, very dynamic real estate market, and there are people that invest in real estate, and when they decide to make an offer to buy a property, it's a private transaction between the person that owns the property and the investor. I don't see how the city could step inside of that transaction without getting in trouble.
as a general statement, what you just said is true. When it comes to affordability, there are different things to consider. So for instance, if we're talking about a property in which the city or another entity has invested funds and contractually and legally imposed a requirement, for instance, a deed restriction that runs with the land, then that comes into play. So I couldn't, for instance, take public money from some source and then do something, and I promise to maintain affordability, and then sell it to Lauren, and Lauren says, well, I guess that deal's over, right? That's accounted for. The other other things to think about are, and that really applies to, any project from like a fairly good-sized LIHTC project to an affordable, a property that's in an affordable home ownership program that would change hands from one first-time buyer to the next first-time buyer. That all applies. But something else to remember is whenever, for instance, in new construction, if the property changes hands, but then the property wants to become something else, and if there were, for instance, to the chair's question earlier about the regulatory regime that might require inclusionary housing, when that new property owner says, I'm going to turn this from a used car lot to, a four-story apartment building, and that regulation is on the books, then the city does have something to say about it, because now that property owner is coming to the city saying, I want to be permitted to build this thing. And then Lauren and company say, okay, but you've got to meet all these rules. So, you've got a building code and zoning and among them inclusionary housing. So,
But here
that
you're
comes into
talking
play.
about the city taking the step of, in the case of a car dealership, to a townhouse development, the city would have a say in that zoning change.
In that example, I think we're assuming, like, if we were to say 10% of all new units have to be affordable, then we would have a process by which we approve the construction of those units and a process by which we ensure the long-term affordability of those 10% units. But you have to create that regulation so that we can insert ourselves in that, who they're leasing to or selling to.
Thank you.
Any more comments or questions?
Are we approving anything tonight, or is this more of a study session for us?
More of a study session tonight. The Planning Commission won't have a formal role in adopting or approving this document, so it's not likely to be adopted as an amendment to the comp plan. It's really more a policy strategic plan, so council would do that. We will plan to come back to you, because in that suite of potential interventions or tools, some would be things that would come to Planning Commission in the future if there were to be changes to Chapter 26, for example. Some things in that suite will probably require more public outreach and more study, in the years to come. And some of those tools will be strictly in the domain of City Council. So we'll continue to give you an update, but no, the short answer is there's no official requests or decision-making.
And what is your timeline for this project?
We will be, so we're going to talk to City Council about sort of we're still figuring out exactly the nature of what that conversation will be, but we'll be talking about some different tools and options and which ones seem interesting and which ones don't. And then from that feed, that'll be August 15th. And then from that point, we will use all the work we've done to date and their feedback in that conversation. And we will craft a draft strategy document that they can consider later on. So we will deliver that probably September-ish, I think. And the city will have that in their hands, and council can consider that and deliberate on it into the fall. And the expectation, I believe, is that it will be adopted at some point as a policy document in the fall. That's the current expectation.
Thank you.
Thank you so much for the presentation. It's very informative. And I thought it was super interesting that this is a really important part of the about the grant and the opportunity to explore it.
Happy to be here. Thank you.
All right, well, then, we had another item as part of new business. This is amendment of the bylaws, and there was a discussion at our last meeting to change the planning commission meeting start time. So Lauren?
Yes, yeah, at your request from the last meeting, we put it on the agenda. I included a brief written memo that sort of summarized what we talked about before in terms of the process by which you can change the start time. That's completely fine. And the bylaws that clearly allow you to do that. I included in there what I had verbally communicated last time in terms of other communities, other board start times. For something like this, I would recommend that you make a motion and see if you have a second, and then you can launch into discussion and then a vote. If you don't have a second, you probably shortcut the conversation. So I'll turn it over to Chair or Vice Chair.
Yes.
I'll make the motion, we'll go from there.
All right.
I move to amend section 1 of the City of Weaver's Planning Commission bylaws such that regular meetings start at 6:30 PM instead of 7 PM.
Second.
All right.
Madam Chair, if I might, as I read through this, it seems to me, I'm not going to support it. It seems to me that it's a change for the sake of change. The question was raised last time about people that work full-time and getting home, having dinner, maybe feeding the family, and then making here by 6:30 might be a bit of an undue pressure. So I just don't think this is something we need to change at this time. The city council meets normally at 7, so I think we should follow their lead.
Madam Chair.
Yes. Commissioner.
Well, I brought it up last meeting. 2 commissioners weren't here, and that's why I suggested we would bring it back when everybody was here. And I know Commissioner Stern had some issues about that at the time. First of all, I really don't propose something for the sake of change. So my point is that at an earlier time would benefit the staff, the public, the commission to get here and get work done and maybe get home at a reasonable hour. I don't believe in doing inconsequential things. So my thought was it's in the global issue, it benefits everybody to get in, get the work done and get home to your families and friends. So it's not for the sake of change, it's just for better policy. And according to the memo that was from staff, it says, at the meeting on June 2nd, 2022, there was a discussion of the Planning Commission start time and a request to add the topic to the July 7th agenda. The start times for Wheat Ridge boards and commissions include the Cultural Commission and Urban Renewal Authority start at 6 p.m. The Parks and Recreation Commission and the Council Study Session are at 6:30 p.m. and regular city council meetings are at 7 p.m. I'll skip the rest of it. This says the commissions of neighboring communities range in their start times, with the most common being 6 to 6:30. So based on that information from staff, that's why I brought this forward.
My observation is we meet so infrequently, I don't think it's a hardship to ask somebody to get here 30 minutes earlier. So I'm going to vote in favor of this.
Commissioner Leo.
Yeah, originally we were talking about 6 o'clock and then of course it's 7. So I think 6:30 is kind of a happy medium and it should be workable. So yeah, I would support 6:30.
All right, any other comments? Feedback? I am one of those people myself that often does have to travel for work, and sometimes it is a challenge to get here before this start time. But I agree with both Commissioner Disney and Leo that our meetings are not so frequent that, I can't work around that. I've been on the commission for 3 years, and I know the 7 p.m. has always worked. I think this is going to be a bit of an adjustment for people, and in some cases, a challenge. But if people are supportive of 6:30, I will support it, recognizing my own personal constraints at times. Any other discussion?
This is Commissioner Stern. I feel like I should speak up since there was a reference to my comments last time. I am not planning to vote for this, but I understand that there is a consensus among the other commissioners, and I will be able to work with this. So sorry to make it not unanimous, but I'm not offended that the other commissioners will vote for this.
right. Well, with that, let's go ahead and vote.
Sorry, motion approved 5-2 with Commissioner Stern and Larson voting against.
All right, let's see. Next item was upcoming dates.
Yes, I don't know when we'll be able to first test out a 6:30 time because we won't be using the July 21st date, and I'm still not sure for August. But we'll let you know when our next meeting will be, and we will make sure to sort of very clearly advertise on the website and remind you all of the new start time. Other project updates, just real quick. I have both projects and properties to share. Hang on, let me get back to my list. Last night, I think we mentioned we had a joint open house, so it was the second public meeting for the 44th Avenue Sudbury Plan and the meeting for affordable housing. We did the same thing in February, and we're getting really good feedback on it being an efficient use of the public's time when we can combine as many city things into one. So we had the police department there, we had sort of general information, folks from every department. It was good. The homework from that, if you didn't attend or haven't seen yet online, so we do have a survey online right now on What's Up Wheat Ridge for affordable housing. We will have the content for 44th and a survey online by Monday on What's Up Wheat Ridge. There's also a new project out of Parks and Rec that is going onto What's Up Wheat Ridge this week. The city is updating the open space management plan. So that's different than the parks master plan where it's sort of more formalized park. Open space is like Lena Gulch, the green belt, how you use it, accommodating different users, how you get to it. So they have a survey that'll be up until mid-August. If you don't see it on the main tile page of What's Up Wheat Ridge, hit the project button. That is new, and we may try to do a joint meeting between 44th and them later this year. In terms of development updates, maybe a highlight here on 38th Avenue. So starting Upham and then heading east, if you can visualize in your mind. A little while ago at 4,000 Upham, so that's the property that had been zone changed a while ago and then got overturned, then came back to you with 11 duplexes. It was 22 units, Ridgetop Village. They are moving forward, and we think we'll be issuing their demo permits for those existing smaller homes and site work permit here really soon. If you've been by the property, we know there's some property maintenance challenges, and they're working with code enforcement, but they'll be much more active on the site here within a matter of weeks. The Commons at 38th, it's not a name off the top of my head yet, but it's the project that is east of Highlands, the really tall building, so it's between Jay and Highlands. It's right next to Christopher House. They were very slow to proceed. They had some water district challenges. If you look into the site now, it's on the south side street. The driveway's in, and they're doing a lot of the utility work, so they'll be going vertical really soon with the townhomes that are behind their commercial structure. And then 38th and Harlan, so the southeast corner, it was every day for a while. That is going to be Huckleberry Roasters. I cannot remember if I gave that update. That's a local coffee roaster in the Denver area. They have 2 other locations in Denver.
Where is this?
The southeast corner of 38th and Harlan. So the building that just got freshly painted white, it's right next to them, right at the corner.
Yeah.
They'll have a drive-through. We process them for drive-through Huckleberry Roasters. So that's exciting. They're going through the permitting process. And then the last one today, Judy Townhomes, which I know we've had sort of highs and lows through their public hearing process. It's that 2-phase project, one on the Infinitus Pie property, one right at 30th and Eaton. They too are getting very close to seeing active work, both on demo and site work. So lots of activity. I think people were sort of waiting out some of the construction and labor costs, and they're hoping it's a little bit better now.
Lauren, can you provide us an update on Ward Station, please?
The
The
station
yeah,
area?
Yes, thank you.
Yeah, I haven't been out there in a while. Toll Brothers is wrapping up Toll Brothers is 200 townhomes divided into 4 phases, and they're getting close to wrapping up their 2nd phase. We've issued permits for their 3rd phase. Hance Ranch is getting pretty close to wrapping up their project. We are still working on city-funded projects from the 2E bond to improve the roads through there. That got put on pause because of COVID. But the Ridge, Tabor, and 52nd are going to get improved with sidewalks. And we are about to federalize the pedestrian bridge over the tracks, but that will give us a lot more federal money instead of local money. So it slows it down just a little bit, but that's moving forward as well. Yeah.
That overpass, is there a schedule for that? I
Not
mean,
that
I understand federal money means a big
Yeah,
question mark.
it's
but
more
yeah.
of an engineering design project. I'm not quite as involved in that one.
Two quick comments, or one question, one comment. I did receive some comments about 38th and Eaton, that they still haven't got any code cleaned up. They still have code violations on 38th and Eaton on that corner with vehicles and stuff. It's the neighbors across the street that are concerned about some of the code violations at 38th and Eaton. And then the other question I had is, what's the status of the project on 32nd and Vance, more or less, that council denied it was legal protest on the rezoning?
Right, so the Mets, well, what were we calling it? Were we calling it Mets? I can't remember. The 14 townhomes, you're right, at 32nd, just behind, just east of Wadsworth. It went to council, there was a legal protest, a lot of public comment, and it failed to get enough vote. It was a motion for support, but they needed a certain number of votes, yep, and they didn't get that. So no movement, that developers walked. The property's been on the market for a while, and I'm not exactly sure what will happen. So they're not pleased, but that is the way that went. It happened right before the affordable housing strategy kicked off, so it gives us a good point of reference of like, it's good to have conversations at the 30,000 foot level, but at some point it leads to very hard conversations on real properties, and yeah, I don't know.
So would you mind letting code enforcement know about 38th
Yeah,
and
I
Eaton?
can
or-
do that.
For what it's worth. It may be cleaned up now if they're starting to do work, I don't know.
Yep. Okay.
It was last week.
All right, great. And seems like we covered any old business.
Yes, no old business.
Okay, do we have a motion to adjourn? Great, we are adjourned.
Motion passed, 7-0.